Okay, hello everyone. I think we are getting live now. Today we are hosting our live session together with my colleague, Shraddha. So Shraddha will share the slides and I will be talking along. Let's see when... So please, for the time being, if you mute your microphones, yes, and if you have any question or comment, you can drop it in the chat box, and we will come back to the question after the talk is over. Can we have slides, full screen slides?
Yeah. Hi, Elena. Hello, everyone. Yeah. Okay. So can you see the slides? I'm sharing the screen.
Is it good now? All right.
Yes, we can see the screen and we can see the slides.
I'm still having like multiple windows. Yeah, now maybe now. All right. So please go to the next slide, Shraddha. So today we are. It's our fourth session itself, and today we are talking about contemporary approaches or perspective to early childhood education. It's in continuation with the talk we had last time, but now we will talk not about so much traditional theories of education, but more about contemporary theories or approaches to education. Next, please. So I set two objectives for today. One is to introduce you with the three well-known contemporary approaches to early childhood education. There are many more of them, but we will focus on the three perspectives, because they are mostly well-formed and mostly popular among the educators in early childhood nowadays. And the next objective is to highlight the key aspects from these approaches or perspectives through the dimensions of the curriculum model. I will get back to the point what are the dimensions of the curriculum model in the time being. So let's start. Next. We will be talking today about these three approaches, as I say. They are Steiner or Waldorf pedagogy, Montessori pedagogy, and Reggio Emilia pedagogy. As I say, they are mostly popular these days. That's why we are looking at them. But of course, we could have looked at many other approaches of the, let's say, 20th century, but maybe they're not so relevant to today's time. In terms of coverage and in terms of practice, they are not so popular and widespread. Next. So, of course, when we talk about any theoretical approach or any theoretical concept, we always have to look into the context. So first, what we will do is that we will look into when and where these approaches appeared. What was the historical origin? What was the time? What were the circumstances? What were the reasons maybe for certain thinking or approaches to appear? And who were the people who influenced the thinkers who designed these contemporary approaches of Waldorf pedagogy, Montessori pedagogy, and Reggio Emilia pedagogy. All these three perspectives, they have European origin, and this is let's go through them one by one, and let's look at the time frame and the context itself, as I say. So Steiner or Waldorf pedagogy, I will use the Steiner option. You might come across the term Waldorf pedagogy. We could use them interchangeably. That is not the main. That is not the main focus now. But the time frame was such that Rudolf Steiner, the thinker behind the pedagogy or behind the method, he lived at the turn of the 18th, 19th century, and he was based in Austria, and he experienced a lot of influence, philosophical influence from the theorists of his time and in his country. And in 1919, he established a school in the city of Stuttgart in Germany. That was a school which actually targeted at primary education. That wasn't yet the time for Steiner pedagogy to spread to early childhood education. So the first Steiner school was actually the primary school. Early childhood education schools which apply Steiner pedagogy appeared only years later. Montessori pedagogy, of course, by the name, the name itself suggests that the prominent thinker of this pedagogy and the one who established the method was Maria Montessori, and she was from Italy. She was by education, she actually was a physician, and only after a few years of her studies, she started to explore a field of psychology, field of education, philosophy, and anthropology. And she developed actually originally the method which looked at support of children with disabilities. Sometime later, she thought that she might be applying her method of work to all the children of the early age. But her first school was actually established in the very poor and disadvantaged areas of Rome for the age group of 4 to 7 year-old children. And after the World War II, she spread her thinking and her pedagogy across the globe, and mostly she was very active in India, and then sometime later the pedagogy spread to the USA and also around Europe. And our third contemporary approach we will talk about today is Reggio Emilia. Again, let's look at the geography aspect. So Reggio Emilia is a city in Italy, and this is where the name comes from. A young teacher named Loris Magalucci, he and the parents in his community, they realized at some point that the change has to be made and that they have to educate children and reconstruct the society so that they could build a new type of society they looked for. And that was also after the Second World War, when the spread of the thinking of Reggio Emilia has actually expanded. As you remember last time when we talked about more traditional philosophies, we started by talking that any theory or any thinking should be placed within a broader concept of what the human person is. And of course, now this is not an exception. We will try to make the connection. We will try to make the connection between actually the pedagogical ideas in these three approaches to what actually the thinkers who established the schools, what they were thinking about the human person and about the development of the child. Next. So when we talk about Steiner pedagogy, the broader context was, as I mentioned, to create a new type of school that would be educating a new type of citizens that would be living in a peaceful society. And Steiner himself, he got a strong influence from the German thinkers, and that's why his pedagogy is partly rooted into this so-called esoteric or spiritual tradition. But as a scientist, he also wanted to combine the scientific plane or the scientific dimension with the spiritual tradition in order to formulate what education should look like, or what actually learning is. So he is famous for establishing so-called anthroposophy, and I'm having a difficulty to articulate, anthroposophy as a type of a thinking of a human being, emphasizing that knowledge is actually within the person, and we have to just study this inner person, which is when we talk about the spirit of the human being. And that's why he came up with this threefold division of the human being, and those three dimensions could be named as the unconscious dimension, or dimensions of the physical body, and the dreamlike conscious dimension, which is like etheric body or soul, and another dimension, instinctive consciousness dimension, which is to do with the astral body or spirit. So he looked at the person, as I say, from the perspective of the spiritual tradition. So that's why we will have this these kind of layers or dimensions. Now, when we talk about Montessori and compare her vision, let's say, to even Steiner, we will see a big difference actually in thinking. Montessori was not really concerned with, though she was a religious person, and the aspect of religion was important to her also, also as embedded in education, but still she was more talking at the child himself and at the nature of the child. And as I say, because she was a physician in the first place by her primary education, she had a very good knowledge about the physiology of a human being, of a child, of a psychology. So she tried to start formulating her approach or her method around the concept of a child. What is it a child? What is it a human being? So for her, a child was born with a certain skills, with certain imprints, and child is very active by nature. Child is curious. Child's development goes through discovering his own inner self, and for her, learning became more important than actually teaching. So she focused on the child. So we can say that that was truly a child centered pedagogy at her time already, and she talked not about teaching in the first place, but she was more concerned about how learning happens. She emphasized the role of the surrounding environment. As you remember, last time I mentioned that she could be roughly named as a social constructivist thinker. So that's why the importance of the surrounding environment was very significant in her thinking. And again, as I say, because she was a physician in the first place, and she knew how the scientific method actually could be applied to the observation of a child or observation of the learning process. So she developed a very systematic method, a very systematic tool, which would combine her knowledge from the physician education to actually to the context of learning, or to the context of a child education. So let's now look at the next approach. And this is a Reggio Emilia approach or pedagogy. It's a very specific approach. It's not actually normally called the method, because it doesn't have such a strong theoretical base as a Montessori method or as a Steiner method, but still it's a very valuable and important approach that many early childhood educators of today apply in their work. So, as I say, it's a specific approach, and it's more about how we think about the education process than anything else in the focus for this particular approach. So the historical context was such that in the aftermath of the Second World War, there was a need to reconstruct and there was a need to build better society, and we would need better citizens. So that was the starting point for their thinking. And as a broad community within the city, led by the teacher, by the young teacher of that time, they set up this this thinking, and they decided that they will have to set up a network of public schools in their city in order to help or in order to integrate children in education. And they were looking for answers to the question, actually, how we understand what child is and how we understand what learning is. And if we talk about educating a child, we also have to talk about the future. How do we see that future, so that we could match today's education to the future goals? So this was at the core of this approach. This approach was largely influenced by many different theories, including Vygotsky's social constructivism theory, because Reggio Emilia approach emphasizes that learning happens through interaction with other people, with the environment. Reggio Emilia also was influenced by John Dewey's thinking, and that is why we will see the elements of inquiry-based learning and active learning and learning by doing within this approach. And also they were also considering certain aspects in line with the cognitive development that Piaget has developed years earlier. So now when you see the context for these approaches and also the reasons why they appeared, we could go into next aspect of our talk today, and we could try to maybe compare these perspectives and to find similarities or as well as differences across these 5 dimensions, which would altogether make up a curriculum model, what we mean by like a curriculum these days. So the dimensions would be the development of child and the theory of learning and the curriculum itself. Another dimension would be actually the environment, the school environment, what would be there if we apply a certain or one of these approaches. Another dimension would be instructional method. what is the role of the teacher, what are the teaching methods used under or within different approaches. Next dimension we will look at relates to observation and assessment, and relates to documentation as well. And then we will also talk about the teacher training aspect. I will just briefly mention that what is the current status of the teacher training within these three contemporary approaches. So let's go next to, actually we will start with this dimension of school environment. So we will look at the understanding of what environment for learning should be within now first the Steiner pedagogy. So Steiner was very much ahead of his time, and he suggested that boys and girls could be brought together in the classroom. So he talked about the co-education, which was quite a revolutionary and quite a progressive idea for that time. He also talked about open schools, so schools have to be available to everybody without any entrance examinations. So basically he would be talking about equal access to education. So children from families with different backgrounds, poor or rich, healthy or let's say children with needs, so everybody would have an equal access to education. He talked about comprehensive education, which would start with the already preschool. So we talk here about the importance of already early childhood education, and then the education system would be taking the child through the years up to the high school. And he also talked about school as a being as a self-governing unit. So he talked about or he placed a lot of emphasis on the importance for the school to be more independent of external control, so that the school would be making decisions relevant to the education within own organization. So imagine that was the thinking 100 years ago. So that was very progressive type of thinking. When we now switch to a more physical environment of the school, so what the school should look like from the Steiner or Waldorf pedagogy, as they discussed already 100 years ago and up to today. So the environment has to be very carefully designed. That is the key and the cornerstone of the Steiner pedagogy. So we have to pay a lot of attention at the design, at the shapes, colors, use of space, but also when talking about the environment, learning environment for the child, we also talk about actually people and not just the physical environment. Physical environment is just one part, but people, let's say teachers, in our sense, teachers and families. So they are also a part of this environment, and they have to behave in a certain way. They have to relate to the children in a certain way. There is an emphasis on how to actually train teachers to meet these needs and requirements. So, as I say, this is like two dimensions of the environment. It's not only its physical environment, but it's also human environment. So the teachers which are surrounding the child. Adult has to be warm and loving and having positive attitudes, because this is how the adult or the teacher models behavior for the child. So Steiner pedagogy really is very careful and very cautious about the design of this overall environment for learning. And since art as one of the key concepts for Steiner pedagogy is here, environment also has to support any artistic activities that children will engage in, because art was actually was a very very important value for Steiner, because he believed that art will liberate the intellectual of a child. I will not go into details of his philosophical thinking, but this is just for us teachers to understand that art is a very important part of Steiner pedagogy and Steiner schools. Next, we could look at how Montessori pedagogy and Montessori schools design their school environments. So they are also talking about the prepared physical environment and also about a prepared adult. So there are again two dimensions to the environment, but in a slightly different way than Steiner pedagogy talks. So prepared adult actually means that we have a knowledgeable teacher who is aware of the physiological and psychological development of the child, and the adult who is in the interaction with that child. So these are the keywords for describing what the prepared adult is in Montessori school. And then when we get to the physical environment, the prepared environment, Montessori pedagogy also puts emphasis on carefully designing the environment where the child is. It has to be ordered. The concept of order is actually very important for the Montessori pedagogy. It has to be aesthetically attractive. It has to be designed so that it can host multi-aged groups, because Montessori pedagogy talked about actually combining children of different ages through the days or within the learning activities or the learning process. Also, if you enter a Montessori school, you will notice that the furnitures and all the materials like around the daycare or the kindergarten are designed so that they will be child-sized. So there will be like low chairs, there will be low tables, there will be small size toys in different playstations and so on. So it has to be, like in terms of scale, up to the size of the child. The environment has to also have environment has to also contain all the materials that promote sensory activities for the child of the child. And Montessori pedagogy also talks about using both indoors and outdoor spaces for learning, which is also a valuable aspect and valuable characteristic of the environment, which actually is nowadays is a very much discussed topic, using both internal and external spaces for learning. Also in Montessori schools, you will see that all the, let's say, learning material is made available for the children. It will be at the height of their eyes or hands, so that they can have free access to the material. Because when we will talk still later about the key principles of Montessori pedagogy, because children learn through exploration, and this is one way to promote exploration is to make all the materials, all the supplies available for children at their own height and at the level of their, like I say, hand or eye. So also in Montessori schools, or you will see that there are, we could call them primary areas, or like we could call them play stations. There are play stations with equipped with certain materials. At least 4 areas you will find within the Montessori school, but there could be also extensions. It depends, of course. It depends on the decision of each particular school. So at least there will be the area for practical life. So there, children will have access to real life, let's say, equipment, like a home play or maybe some craft tools. So something that will let them practice and exercise their practical everyday life skills. There will be another area or another play station with the sensory material, because sensory development is also another important aspect in Montessori thinking. And there will be a language area with the specially designed toys for that purpose, and there will be a math area, and like I say, there might be extensions and many more areas, but at least these 4 primary areas or play stations will be within the Montessori school. When we talk about Reggio Emilia school environment, we will talk about environment as actually the third teacher. What it means is that Reggio Emilia pedagogy places a lot of emphasis on the value of the surrounding environment. Environment has to be designed so that it will support child's activities. Spaces must be open. They must be designed so that they can be remodified for different purposes. So when you are in the Reggio Emilia inspired school, you will not probably see ever the fixed, let's say, play stations for the children. Like you would have a PlayStation for the home play. You would have another station for, let's say, the fireman play and the outer space play. So you will not have these fixed spaces assigned for a certain purpose or for a certain play, but rather you will see a more open space that can be remodified, and new supplies and new toys can be taken in, and new play actually can be designed, but still within the same like physical space. So it's, like I say, it's very important here, because I know that, for example, in some Asian countries, there are a lot of daycares where the play areas are actually designed so that only one type of play can be happening in that one space. So this is not in line with the, at least, Reggio Emilia pedagogy, and I have to say that it's not also in line, once you want to know about the Finnish way of thinking, it's not in line with the Finnish type of thinking either. So why I stop here, because I think it's very important to make you kind of understand that space is really designed in a different way within the Reggio Emilia pedagogy. Of course, elements like of natural work, like plants, or like, let's say, an aquario or terrario, can be all these elements can be actually found within the Reggio Emilia daycare or kindergarten. It is because the idea is to provide, of course, multisensory activities or multisensory opportunities for the child, but also to kind of model the world for the child. So what is available out there, it's also available here within our daycare. And again, Reggio Emilia talked about the value of indoor and outdoor spaces and learning. So that is also quite progressive for the time when the whole concept was formulated. Next, we will look at another aspect, another dimension of the curriculum model. Actually, this part about curriculum itself and about how learning and development are viewed. So when we get back to Steiner or Waldorf pedagogy, and we talk about learning and about their understanding of child development, we have to actually replace the term teaching with the term learning, because Steiner pedagogy doesn't put so much emphasis on teaching itself, but it's more about helping a child, aiding child, supporting child to learn certain skills and certain knowledge. So Steiner pedagogy emphasized the value of childhood, the uniqueness of this time, and actually they were talking about continuous and in a way lifelong learning of a human being, but the early childhood was one distinct stage within this continuous lifelong learning, and that stage would be starting from birth up to 7 years old of age. So this one stage of development would be then continued by the next stage, which would again take another 7 years, and then the next stage when the child is already, or not the child, but the human person is already in his teenage, another 7 years. But the point is here that Steiner emphasized this cycle of 7 years because he believed that within this each stage there is a certain type of quality, certain type of characteristics in children that develop mostly. So when he talked about like early childhood from 0 to 7 years, he talked about importance of physical development of a child, and he saw the child as not as a adult of a smaller size, but he thought of a child as a small human being who needs time in the first place to develop his central nervous system and to develop his body and to develop his organs, and by that to develop his senses and his activities and so on and so forth. So the primary focus for the early childhood was almost in the physical development. And Steiner also believed that there are 3 innate abilities which define this early childhood stage, and these are sensation, so that emphasizing that the child is open to all sensory inputs from the environment, and actually through that his body and organs are being formed. He also emphasized the role of imitation. Imitation means that the child imitates everything what an adult is doing. So let's say example of language. So child learns via imitation, by listening and imitating the speech. So child learns certain practices and skills also by imitating adults or older children around. So a lot of emphasis is put on the imitation aspect. And then he also talked about the development of the will, particularly at this age. And he talked about the innate will. So the child is already born with certain innate will, and the child, let's say, instinctively tries to grab the toy, or the child instinctively tries to lift up his head and so on. But by the time and by the age of 6 or 7 years old, the child will already have more conscious will, and that means that the child will be able to already select activities for himself, set the goals for activities or for action for himself. He also talked about the role of imagination, and for him, imagination and thinking are not any separate aspects. Steiner really believed that imagination only can develop in connection with the physical development and advancement. So, of course, the more advanced physical skills were, the more the child could explore. So, the more his imagination would be developing. Central point to the early childhood education curriculum is to provide the child with the opportunities to experience the goodness of the world, the good sides, the good qualities of the world. So in a way, it's a little bit maybe idealistic type of thinking, but that was still and that is still very important for the Steiner pedagogy. The idea behind is that the child should not be at this early age facing the concerns of the society. The child should take his time and develop at his own pace, and in the first place develop physically, and therefore develop mentally and spiritually. When we look at the curriculum, at the child development and learning curriculum aspects from the Montessori perspective. Next. Yep. We will talk about actually several principles which were crucial for formulating the Montessori tradition. But in the first place, Montessori talked about learning as a type of a work for the child. So learning is not just, let's say, fun or whatever random type of activity. It's more of a work for the child to promote the child's development. And Montessori designed several principles which are, as I say, crucial to learning, and some of them which relate to early childhood education are here. So first is the principle of individual development. Montessori talked about every child being unique, and also about giving a child his own time and his own space to develop. Every child is valuable as an individual, whether he had certain needs or whether he would be just a regular normal child. She talked about, as again I say, as a physician and a psychologist, she was very much aware of how the child developments happen, and she put a lot of emphasis, like also on emphasizing the value of these stages of development. So for her as well, development was divided into stages, but as opposed now to the Steiner tradition, it was more about, I think it is about 6 years periods, and not 7 as in Steiner pedagogy about it was. So her early childhood definition would be the child from birth to 6 years old, and then next stage would start at about 6 to 12, and 12 and so forth. And what is important for the early years is again sensory development. It's the cornerstone of Montessori pedagogy, and it's importance of using language in interaction, because she also believed that a lot of learning happens through using language. Another principle that she formulated is the principle of freedom and liberty. So education for Montessori, it should provide just natural and free manifestation of the child. So the child will have his ways and his space to be a child. Principle of self-education is another important principle here. It's about learning. It's also about a lot of self-directed learning, so that the child would be through the process of learning without interruption and without interference from the adult. Also, special didactic toys were designed for the purpose of teaching different skills. And Montessori believed that this is a very important aspect, to provide the right type of toys in the right time to the child, in order to keep the child naturally busy. So Montessori also talked about teaching everyday skills, so self-help skills, about, as I mentioned before, a sense of order. So everything has to be placed in order. Children in Montessori school have to tidy up after their play, and they know the right places for the items, so it's a part of the play. It's like into the stage of tidying up is integrated in this process of play. A lot of respect and a lot of respect to everyday tasks is also another emphasis within the Montessori tradition. So children would, like I say, tidy up after themselves. So they would maybe cook the food for themselves. So they would do regular chores around the daycare. So this is also an important part of the tradition. And another principle she formulated is the principle of sense training and muscular training. She also believed that it's very important to stimulate the physical activity of a child of the early age, and provide him with diverse sensory activities, because through the senses the child's intellectual development happen. She talked about the sensitivity periods, and for her, senses mostly are active at the age of 3 to 7 years. And learning happens actually through the chain, which contains exploration, manipulation with the items, repetition of certain actions or activities, and then uninterrupted concentration and control of error. There are certain toys which are developed for each of these purposes. And like I say, Montessori tradition is really about using their own learning materials designed very much for learning as they see and they understand it. Next, we will look at Reggio Emilia. Thinking of what child is and what learning and what curriculum could look like. And you probably have heard the famous poem of associated with the Reggio Emilia pedagogy. The poem is called The 100 Languages of Children. So this could be used as a motto for Reggio Emilia tradition. They really emphasize the importance of developing all areas of learning, all areas of experience in the world provided to the child. And they also said that child experiences and can experience world in many different ways. There are endless possibilities, and therefore there are like endless languages of expressing themselves. So children can express themselves through playing, through singing, through dancing, through laughing, through crying, through all type of actions, which is all accepted and which is all understood to be just natural to the child. So within the Reggio Emilia tradition, we can truly talk about child-centered approach to education, because the child has a lot of space, a lot of freedom to express himself, to be a child, to explore, to ask questions, to engage in self-learning. And Reggio Emilia, again, makes it really makes a lot of puts a lot of emphasis on the aspect that research is the fundamental learning strategy for the child. So child has to be actively engaged, child has to be initiating his own learning, and only then learning actually takes place. It is so because child is believed to be born with the enormous gift of curiosity and imagination. So these are the natural characteristics, and we and the environment, we just have to support this innate drive in the child. Within Reggio Emilia tradition, you will hardly find any structured curriculum. So it's very fair to talk about emergent curriculum here, which means that there probably are guidelines, of course, how to design certain activities, but there are no clear written or clear designed lesson plans or plans for the year or for the term, because it's against the thinking of the child-initiated learning. I will still look into this aspect more when we reach the point on actually role of the teacher and the instructional strategies. But now let's start first with the with what Waldorf or what Steiner tradition, or how the Steiner tradition interpreted what the role of a teacher is, and what instructional methods actually should be used in order for learning to happen. Play was, of course, a valuable resource for Steiner, because he, as I say again, he believed that development of a child has to happen at a natural pace without hurry. So it's natural for child to play, and child and play therefore are inseparable things. Play allows the child to experience, to feel, to imagine, to understand the concepts. So play is really a valuable resource, and play could also reflect how child learns and what actually his actual developmental status is. So play is within this tradition is already realized as a valuable resource. There have been specially designed toys also for the purpose of learning within the Steiner tradition. There are roughly, we can say, two types of toys that are available in the play environment. Non-literal toys, so the toys without any specific task or purpose, and the use of the toys can be redefined. So toys that could be used in many different types of play, so that there would be a space for the child's imagination how to use actually the play supply. And then there are also specially designed literal toys with a highly detailed and prescribed features. They would have their own function, might be related to a certain theme that is studied through the year, or might be related to a certain specific story or a game. So there are those specifically designed toys. Rhythm is a very important concept within this tradition. Everything has to be going through the repetition. Why so? Because Steiner thought that this is the way to help child to understand the world better, and to help the child not to get into the trouble of getting, let's say, kind of lost in the routines. So everything is like rhythmic and according to either day flow or according to the themes through the weeks, or holidays or festivals taking place in certain time, or according to certain activity, like, let's say, nature trip. So the children have to experience this certain rhythm in their life, and that's how you would kind of ensure that they feel safe and secure within this environment, and also through the early childhood years. As I mentioned, the art is a key concept to Steiner pedagogy, to Steiner tradition. So all type of creative plays and activities that promote child's imagination, help him to live through the emotions, and eventually arrive at values. So all these activities are in place, and the Steiner tradition is famous for designing so-called eurythmy. It's a type of movement involving music, dance, and drama. So it's a special type of activity typical for the Steiner school. Because Steiner wanted to create this, like I called, a little bit idealistic picture of the world. He meant that children are not ready to face real societal problems. So the world has to look good to them within early childhood. So because of that, Steiner pedagogy uses a lot of fairy tales and a lot of storytelling in their practice. They also do other creative activities, like, of course, singing, playing instrument, rhyming, reciting poems, drawing, painting, playing, of course, and also using different materials for creative art, and also natural materials for creative art. So they have really very rich content of creative activities within. They discourage use of media exactly for the reason that the child is not yet, at early ages, the child is not ready to face those problems of the outside world. When we look next at the instructional methods for within the Montessori tradition, we will surely notice that the role of a teacher is to foster, guide, direct, and help a child. The teacher, because the teacher believes in the uniqueness and individuality of a person, of every child, the teacher should also serve as a model to that child, as a moral model. To have the teacher should possess certain qualities, and also the teacher should have extensive knowledge of a child development in order to understand why a child behaves or acts in certain way in through different stages in his development. All the materials and toys, mostly all, they will have a certain purpose. So it's like I say, I call it like a purposeful learning, which is how I describe Montessori pedagogy. So materials for sensory training would be really carefully selected materials of a certain size, form, texture, materials for auditory perception or for tactile experiences. So there will be almost always a purpose for the toys or for the material or for the equipment within the Montessori settings. Teacher normally follows the principle no material rewards and punishments. So it means that the teachers think in contrast to what we discussed last time as a positive reinforcement mechanism within the behaviorist thinking. Yeah, so here teachers will not use these methods. Rather, the teachers will try to understand that this is how the child functions, and they will minimize actually confrontations within the settings by focusing so much on individual play and individual tasks. So it's another typical characteristics of Montessori schools. So as I say, they are not practicing group activities, or they are not using the group methods. This is not a part of Montessori thinking. This is about mostly about individual development and about helping child to advance his own skills. Of course, we still talk about interaction within the group, and there are, of course, groups of children and multi-age groups, but because of the environment, because the environment is set in a way that there is no competition within children, there is something for everybody. So it minimizes the problems that children would otherwise run into like, let's say, more regular or more traditional daycares or pedagogies. What strikes me also, another thing, is that the role of imagination is actually not so much appreciated in the Montessori tradition. There is a so-called principle of no fairy tales. So as you see, there is a straightforward contrast towards Steiner's thinking, where he thought that stories are an essential part of everyday life. So for Montessori, again, the stories would be something that just confuses the child understanding of the real world. So there is probably some space to, let's say, develop this tradition in that direction. And if we look next at Reggio Emilia tradition, we will talk about a teacher who is in a different role again. The teacher is a co-learner, collaborator, researcher, guide, facilitator, nurturer. So the teacher is more of a partner in the learning process. The teacher is not there to transmit the knowledge or to teach certain skills, but the teacher is more to facilitate the child's development and to be there for the child and listen to his thoughts, ideas, appreciate and respect and value his thinking. So as we see, the role of a teacher is again so different here, even to compare to Montessori tradition, where activities are prepared by teachers and the environment is so much created by teachers, and the teachers are there to exercise more purposeful learning with the children. So within this tradition, we start talking about actually inquiry-based learning and about long-term projects that as the key methods actually in teaching learning process, because they provide space and opportunities for developing critical and creative thinking, for problem solving, for cooperation and social and negotiation skills. So that's what I meant when I talked about that no any strict curriculum, but there is this more flexible curriculum, because again the starting point is that the teacher is there to listen to the child and to stick to his interests and to take his own thinking and his own initiatives forward to the next level, so that the development of a child is promoted in the best way possible. Topics and themes for the projects, and of course they are also based on what interest the children have, or maybe a larger community has, because the whole Reggio Emilia perspective, as we remember, is having the history of this community process. Within this tradition, we also talk about small group activities. So, of course, for a teacher to be available to the children, to be really able to listen to them, the size of the group has to be small. So that is another characteristic of this approach. And the role of expressive art is just so huge within this thinking. So there are activities like sculpture, dramatic play, puppet theater, painting, dancing, music construction, writing, and so on. All type of activities that would help child to express himself in that what Reggio Emilia says 100 languages. So activities which promote the self-expression skills are an integral part of this approach. We could talk about the next dimension of the curriculum model now, and the dimension is observation, documentation, and assessment. So what is it like within the Steiner tradition, within the Steiner pedagogy? Observations are actually meant to help us to build a broader picture of a child, of a human being. And it has to do again with the whole philosophy of the human person within this tradition. Assessment and observation is mostly formative in nature. So, we cannot, within this tradition, we can never, let's say, judge how good or how, let's say, maybe bad the piece of art or the drawing or the painting that the child made. So this tradition is not allowing this type of thinking at all, because the individual child is the starting point for thinking, and we look at the progress within the child, or progress that the child makes in relation to what he has been, let's say, or he was a few days ago or few weeks ago. So it's rather assessment. It's rather a formative assessment. So we observe the child, the whole child. So we use the holistic perspective here. We observe physical, emotional, social, cognitive, and speech development. And it's all for, again, building better understanding who that child is, the bigger picture of him, rather than what he can do. So that is, as you see, a different type of thinking if we compare to like traditional thinking, we filled with assessments with certain standards and criteria. So that is not the main focus of the Steiner tradition. Of course, when teacher is understanding how the child develops, the teacher has the knowledge of psychological and physical development of a child. The teacher engages in the appropriate observations, age-related observations, both planned and spontaneous observations. So the teachers within this tradition also, of course, observe naturally occurring activities and context. It's never like an observation of a setup situation or a situation that the child is told or asked
Hello.
asked to engage in.
Hello. I think there is a
What are
background.
the various let's say techniques that the teacher within the Steiner tradition would use? It's interview with parents in the first place, because there is an understanding that cooperation with the parents is very important in order to have a consistent pattern in the upbringing and developing a child. We can also talk about daily session evaluations, or like daily observations, regular daily observations, more to review what has been done or what is taking place, and to inform maybe further planning for the next activities or for the upcoming days. Group observations also take place to see the interaction between children, because that is how you can also observe certain skills. Individual child study is another important tool or technique here. Extensive writing would take place. The writing would be such that it also invites the perspectives of the parents and also of other teachers who work with that child. And then you will always come back to this same child and observe him after a certain period of time. So you will repeat the observation on the same aspect or on the same topic. So you will kind of have a story how the development has gone, or what has been taking place through the certain period of time. So this would make an individual child study. There are also like regular child records, which are like more of a statistical type of observations with basic data or with basic information on the child. End of the year report would be also drafted for a child, and also individual plans would be designed if the child is experiencing, let's say, difficulty, or if there is support for learning if there is a need for learning support, and so this type of observation also like takes place where the teachers then have to reflect how to work with that particular child experiencing that particular difficulty or challenge. Now, if we look at Montessori tradition and what observation and documentation would mean here, we will see that again we talk about the whole child observations in a similar line as within the Steiner tradition, and Montessori also emphasized that because children develop at different pace and they have different developmental needs, so observation should also be done differently. So the different children would, let's say, need or benefit from different types of observation. Emphasis is on a continuous formative assessment, because for Montessori it's more important again to look at the process rather than the output. So the question that would be asked within the observations are more of a how type of questions. So how does the child engage in activity? How does the child work with certain material? Or how does the child express his interest? So these are like questions different than questions if we would talk again if the child is able to perform certain skills. So Montessori is not looking at the output, but as I say, more into how, because that would inform teachers' decisions on how they could develop their activities or how they could probably relate certain teaching learning material to the needs of the child. So observation is in a way aiming at providing a teacher with the information so that the teacher is able to improve the environment for the child and therefore to advance the child's learning. Because as we remember, Montessori tradition talks about the prepared environment. So that would be the main goal. How can we update the environment so that the desired learning would happen? And like in terms of the tools, daily observations take place, and the checklists, assessment checklists of the environment. Specially designed Montessori toys also can kind of provide certain immediate feedback to the children or to the adults who work with that child. Let's say if you have within Montessori tradition, you will have a certain jigsaw or certain puzzle, and then the child has to fit the piece into the, let's say, of the right shape or into the right place. So if it doesn't fit, that's immediate response to the child that this is not the right way to act. But this is also a feedback to the teacher about the child's understanding of the concept and the child's current status of development for this particular skill. And next, we could look at the understanding of observation, assessment, and documentation within the Reggio Emilia approach. Teachers closely observe children by definition, because teachers, as I mentioned earlier, teachers are there to listen to the children's thoughts and ideas. And so already this kind of live interaction with the child and being receptive to listening to the child already gives immediately the information about the learning process. So this is one way to run the observation. And documenting happens through various media, by taking photos, videos, by also let's say analyzing the art or craft work of a child. So documenting is also done so that the teacher will then together with the child review what has been done. So documentation is not necessarily done or primarily done for the purpose of assessing how good child is at certain skill level, but it's more about providing a foundation for communication with the child. So first documentation is done, like I say, through various media, and then it is looked through together with the child so that the teacher and the child can communicate and discuss actually what has been done and maybe how the child feels about doing certain things. And the teacher would pose a lot of open questions to give a child an opportunity to express himself. Because as you remember, the aspect of expressing himself, expressing the child expressing himself is a very important aspect within this tradition. Documentation is also done for assessment of learning process by giving value to the child's possibilities. So every effort, every action of a child is really valued, and it is for the child to understand that it is appreciated. So through, like I say, discussing and viewing photos, videos, and so on and so forth, we really give a child understand that his ways are very, very valuable. Also, close interaction with the families taking place within this tradition, because the idea is that the continuous observation should happen through the day, through the life of a child, and open communication with families is very much welcome and valued here. If we look now at the last dimension of the curriculum model, which is about teacher training. So what is the current status of the teacher training within different traditions? Steiner or Waldorf pedagogy, as I mentioned, is can truly be called a method, a well-designed, well-defined method. And there are at least some statistics suggest that there are over like 100,000 schools in over 40 countries around the world, and these schools are normally recognized by the local governments as equally valuable schools as the mainstream traditional schools. So these schools have very good status, and therefore they need specially trained teachers. So there are formal teacher qualifications provided by the specialized Steiner pedagogy training institutes, and these qualifications are normally recognized by the at least local authorities. Like I say, because the schools themselves are recognized as equal schools to these mainstream schools. So there is a well set, like, let's say, model, starting with the philosophy and theoretical background, and ending up with the formal teacher training. When we look at Montessori tradition next, then normally these schools are set up, and they are having like legal grounds for operation in many countries, but it's not such a well-defined model in terms of bureaucracy as the Steiner School. Nevertheless, there are teacher trainings provided to the teachers, teacher trainings of different levels of professional skills. They are logically organized by the organizations which are affiliated with the Montessori method. And that's just a historical fact that actually the first international teacher training happened already over 100 years ago from now. So the Montessori pedagogy has a long tradition of educating teachers, but like I say, the status is still different from what the status of Steiner schools and Steiner teacher trainings are. And Reggio Emilia, as I also mentioned in the beginning, this is not called as a method as such. This is more called as an approach to education, and it's very common to talk actually not about even Reggio Emilia schools, but about Reggio-inspired schools. In this formal sense, it's not so well established tradition as Steiner or even as Montessori tradition. Nevertheless, it's getting very popular nowadays across many countries, and there is no like formal training provided by certain institutes which give you credentials and authorizations, but still there are trainings available for the teachers who want to expose themselves to this type of thinking. And I think that now when we have covered the dimensions of the curriculum model, we could kind of just now sum up and actually think in a way that, of course, there are many overlaps and many practices that are common to these three contemporary approaches, but then, of course, there are differences. But the differences are at a deeper level. The differences are at the level of philosophy or the key principles, which are which serve as a foundation for designing the thinking. So many contemporary mainstream schools and even many educators within all these three traditions, they would agree on general practices, because as we have seen that that a child is placed in the center of the learning process, within these three traditions, and many pedagogical educational practices are almost are overlapping, are having similar features. So sometimes these traditions are confused, but still there are, of course, distinct differences. But as I say, that these differences lie at the deeper level, at the level of thinking and principles. And as an example, like if I, for myself, would define what is the key word or what is the key idea of these three contemporary pedagogies, I would say that, well, for Steiner, that was a talk about spirituality and about the human being having all these dimensions of soul, heart, and of soul, spirit, and body. So that is the emphasis, developing the human being in that direction, in the direction of spirituality. And if I would define what is the key word or what is the key principle for Montessori, I would say that it's emphasis on purposeful learning, though of course, again, still the child is at the center of the learning process, and we can truly say that it's a child-centered pedagogy. But still, the focus is a bit different. The emphasis is different because the thinking behind the whole aim of learning is probably a bit different. And as for Reggio Emilia pedagogy, well, I have it blank here, but though I have, you can define your own keyword. But for me, it's truly child-centered pedagogy with a child who is truly a self-directed learner, and with a child whose development is promoted in the well-rounded fashion. So you can think for yourself how you kind of understand these different approaches and what you value maybe most as one single approach, or maybe you will come up with certain elements within each of the approach that you value most. That is an interesting discussion in itself, actually. But I think we could stop at this point, and I would like to thank you all for now. And as a follow-up to this session, I will provide additional readings on the 3 approaches and an assignment, so that you could reflect what your thinking, your understanding on your values are. Thank you so much.